had nowhere to put this. Okay, so you've got, that's fine. This is the debate on Shakespeare versus Edward de Vere.
Okay. Hello, my name is Kendra DiRezza, and I'm on the affirmative side. I'm honored to speak about the mystery of the true Shakespeare. The issue that we are trying to solve is if Edward de Vere or William Shakespeare are the true writers. We are speaking on behalf of Edward de Vere to state that he is the true writer of all the Shakespeare plays and sonnets. Some evidence that we found, thy content Shakespeare's, that is how de Vere was once described in royal court. Is this how he came up with the name Shakespeare? The similarities between Edward de Vere's life and Hamlet suggest that Hamlet was almost an autobiographical play about the Earl's life. De Vere had the right education and social standing to write in detail about the classics about law, foreign countries, and language, which William Shakespeare did not. He just lived, he was a country bumpkin from Stanford-upon-Avon, and would simply have been unequipped to write about such things, so he had no idea how to write any of that. There are also other similarities in Edward de Vere's verses to Shakespeare suggest, however, that such a leap in poetry composing was possible. Edward de Vere fits the bill here since he is known to have graduated from Cambridge University at age 14, which is a very early age. And de Vere was well-traveled and spent most of his life in Italy. 14 of Shakespeare's plays were actually written in Italian settings, so that is another evidence. A standard line for the Edward de Vere used was Shakespeare was trying to avoid breaking an artistic convention not to write, so Edward de Vere didn't want to write and use his own name so that people, he could still be an aristocrat and high standing in royalty. One of Edward's first tutor was Arthur Golding, a scholar and translator, and in many of Shakespeare's plays he was heavily influenced by Arthur Golding's, and there is some evidence to suggest that Golding lived in the same household as de Vere. Some of the de Vere's early poetry appeared in print under his own name, but then he ended up changing it because he didn't want people to know that he was the Shakespeare. Okay, the conclusion.
Hello, my name is Whitney Belew. I am on behalf for the negative, expressing the privilege of debating the topic concerning William Shakespeare. Our correct definitions, as what was through the paper, was a play. A play is a stage or presentation of an action or story or dramatic composition. Our second definition would have been William Shakespeare, one of the greatest English composers of literatures, plays, sonnets, poems. He was born in Stanford, England, April 23rd, 1564, and died April 23rd, 1616. Also, our other definition in parentheses, should be attributed, suggesting that Edward de Vere should be attributed, not saying he is. A suggestion, a train of thought, no exact reasoning upon Edward de Vere as the composer of literature. My intent is to prove through our facts and dates verifying William Shakespeare was the man to take full credit on behalf of the many plays, sonnets, and poems underneath his name. Our position of philosophy debating upon William Shakespeare as a composer rather than Edward de Vere should be attributed. Our evidence of my first contention would be de Vere entirely is off superstition, theory, and within the movie was stated that it was made to be believed through William Shakespeare's works that it was upon superstition that Edward de Vere secretly put his life or well-being into the plays. Our second contention was Edward de Vere died 1604 while Shakespeare still was being composed of his literature, such as Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra, King Lear, The Tempest, and sonnets of 37, 36, 89, and 125. His literature composing dated as late as 1621, while Edward de Vere died at 1604. So how could William Shakespeare, as being signed, how could Edward de Vere have already died at 1604? Our third contention is he signed his works while other people published them, perhaps being discreet. Maybe he did have different labeling underneath his name, but they were still signed after Edward de Vere's death. Our conclusion is our negative case on the topic composing William Shakespeare develops a debate whether Edward de Vere contributed to William's plays through superstition, false evidence with dates, and his signed works. Thank you. Now I stand for questions. What my opponent said was Edward de Vere was a true writer. Well, of course he was a true writer, but that does not comply of him being the composer of his literature. Hamlet, he was also compared to Hamlet.
I think it was italic on the second one. This one's on the first one.
As she said, it fights the bill that he was unequipped, that William Shakespeare was unequipped with his education. Yes, Edward de Vere could have had the more right of having a higher education, but that does not stand any difference that William Shakespeare could have had the same right as writing what he had wrote. It didn't matter that Edward de Vere had a first tutor. Of course, he had aristocrat and high royalty still wanted to be discreet about using a different undername as using William Shakespeare. I would believe that if you wanted, even if you were in royalty, that it would actually be highlighted that you were a great writer and not keep it discreet. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Taylor Maik. I am on the affirmative side of the debate. My partner and I believe that Edward de Vere was the real Shakespeare. Going off of what Kendra said, all of her points are reliable. According to the Shakespeare Oxford Society website, Edward de Vere was very similar to the famous character Hamlet, and was much like an autobiography of his life. De Vere was smart and very capable of writing the famous plays. After all, he did graduate from Cambridge University at the age of 14. According to the biography on Shakespeare, it is said that he attended Stratford Grammar School And at the age of 13, he was pulled out of school because of his father's financial problems. It also says that this is all a myth, that Shakespeare might not have attended the school at all. And even if he did, how would he gain the knowledge to write these plays without the proper education? It is also said that Shakespeare might not have hardly been able to even write his name. Edward de Vere was surrounded himself with scholars like Arthur Golding, who was his first tutor and would make him an obvious candidate for being the real author. According to my research, I have many reasons why Edward de Vere was capable of writing the 37 plays and 154 sonnets that William Shakespeare took the credit for. An example would be The Merchants of Venice, which was a play about law, and what most people don't know is that Edward de Vere studied law at the Gray's Inn. Account books clearly show that Edward de Vere had an extensive library which could qualify him to write as well as Shakespeare. According to the movie, there were only two signatures of Shakespeare that could be found, and both were different. There was no proof of Shakespeare actually living, and no one knows what he looks like. Okay, I have some questions for the negative side that you could answer in your next time up. Do you think by the evidence that we've given that Edward de Vere was qualified to write the plays and sonnets that Shakespeare is believed to have wrote? And my next question is, do you think that the nickname given to de Vere, Spear Shaker, by the court is just a coincidence, or do you believe he used the name Shakespeare as a cover-up so people wouldn't know his true identity? Okay, conclusion. My partner and I have the facts to prove that the real Shakespeare is Edward de Vere. We believe that the facts lean more towards de Vere because of his qualifications, the people he surrounded himself with, and we think that there are just too many coincidences in our research. Me and my partner will gladly consider the other side of the debate. Thank you.
Okay, hello, my name is Katrina, and I hereby stand that Shakespeare is the true author of all his plays. A lot of times I hear that because of his education, he wasn't well equipped, but being rich and royal, it's easy to get into a good school. So having a good school, how does that determine someone's academically smart? And then also they said that Shakespeare was not a real man, but Edward had a lot of corporations, and he worked with many people, such as William Jaggard. They published the first folio and the Passionate Pilgrim, and it said, "With Shakespeare." Why would someone lie about their work with someone else? And then in 1996, Yale University Press became the first major publisher to produce an edition of a play under Shakespeare's name. So he didn't even work with Shakespeare, he just practically gave his name a high praising. Obviously he must have known the man and known of his good works to go out and reach out to say that he was such a good person and put something under him. He also sees praise by Richard Barnefield and Francis Mears in 1598 by the essay Comparative Discourse of Our English Poets. And then there was a monument made in 1653 after he died and also after de Vere died, who would go out of nowhere to just make a face for him and come up with such a featured like statue. So I believe that by this evidence, that he is real, and he worked with many people, so obviously he must have had like he's a real person. The only evidence that they have is superstition, knowing that he was smart. He went to school, had a better school. Edward studied law and an expensive library, but who knows if he used it. Like, you could pass a class with a D. Like, you can, like, just because of his money, he went to a great place. So in all, I believe that their evidence is more of superstition and more of like a theory, and our evidence is more firm. So I still think that Shakespeare was the true man who made all of the plays, and yeah, thank you. Very good.
Yeah. How long is this one? Okay, the con of William Shakespeare, Katrina said that you don't have to exactly go to a fancy school to have all the education that you need to write, but it's more likely to know that Edward de Vere actually wrote the plays and sonnets. Throughout his life, de Vere maintained a friendship with literary men, and at one time or another employed such writers as Thomas Churchyard, John Lilly, and Anthony Munday. Lilly, the author of two of the earliest English novels, Enfuse, The Anatomy of Wit, and Enfuse and His England, dedicated the letter to De Vere and acted as his personal secretary. De Vere was also sponsored companies of both adults and boy actors, and employing Lilly as their manager, and in the early 1580s held a lease on their indoor Blackfriars Theatre. So Edward de Vere was into the plays. He gave money to many of the plays and theaters. He even had his own called the Blackfriars Theatre. He was also, de Vere was supposed to be a I can't even say it, but but he's a Catholic, and he was trying to go against the Queen. From his teenage, de Vere was known as an elegant dresser and lavish spender, so he spent most of his money on theaters and whatever he could to get his name out there. In a discourse of English poetry, the Earl of Oxford was praised as the most excellent of poets as the court, and the author of the Arts of English asserted that he would be known as the best of courtly poets, which if their, and this is a quote, if their doings could be found out. A lot of people believe that Edward de Vere written and kept under wraps of the publications and dates, and that he gave people his poets and like Macbeth, and even though he died, he gave it to other people so that they could publish it. He ceased publishing under his own name in 1593, but in the same year that the name William Shakespeare appeared. So it's probably because the hyphenation was rarely used then, and the name points to de Vere. There's a quote, "The only proof necessary is that Shakespeare could have written the plays and sonnets, not that he did, more Edward Shakespeare, because he actually had all of the education and life experience, unlike William Shakespeare did." Is that it? Thank you.
As my opponent has stated that you don't have to go to a fancy school, as Edward de Vere was claimed to have the best doings would be found, wouldn't he have signed his own name instead of making up William Shakespeare's as a possibility? That points prove that William Shakespeare's works were signed of his name at the end. If he was such of accompanied during poems and was well known through Thomas Churchyard or Anthony or Lewis, then why, if they knew, then why wouldn't his name be at the end of each poem, each play, or each sonnet? Yes, he had multiple friends throughout his hierarchy and went to high school, not high school, but had the education, but that does still not prove that Edward de Vere could have been the composer. If he was, he would have signed his name at the end of it. Also, I would like to restate that 20 years after Edward de Vere had died, the works of William Shakespeare was composed. 20 years, that is 2 decades, and plenty of time to write plays, which if they were from Edward de Vere, he had already passed. A monument was still created after 50 years of Edward died in 1605. That's 3 generations. How they had to have known if William Shakespeare was alive at Stratford-on-Avon. Also with education, William Shakespeare went to the local school, dropped out at 15, just as like de Vere did at 14. So he had just as much right as to write his plays and get credit with under his name. Thank you.
me to the attendance office, please?
Okay, I've got a quote here from Daniel Wright, and he says, "These words are the mature achievements of a worldly and urban literature who could not tell the world his name. And there's the rub, as Hamlet says, at least for the Shakespearean traditionalists." So that pretty much means that Edward de Vere could have been the actual Shakespeare. He could have just been using Shakespeare's name. And then after Edward de Vere died, the plays and the sonnets kept coming out. So how do we know that Edward de Vere could have just been using his name and someone else could have just been using his name after he died? Edward de Vere was, according to the curriculum in Cecil's own hand, Edward de Vere's daily studies included dancing, French, Latin, writing, and drawing, cosmography, penmanship, writing, shooting, exercise, and prayer. Edward de Vere showed a prodigious talent for scholarship from his early years. So he's made writing and things like that part of his life ever since he was young. So we just think that he's a really good candidate for the real Shakespeare. Thank you.
Okay, hello. The only real evidence that de Vere's side has is that educational-wise, and also that the reason why he didn't want his name was because he was royalty and he didn't want to become any less. But Shakespeare was a very popular man. How would that become any lesser than making him a greater person? If it was educational-wise and because he speaks with men or literary people, then we could say that anyone that went to a high class and anything could have been Shakespeare. Edward's name is really kind of just a myth and superstition. Also, Shakespeare worked with many people and was praised by many other workers. Giving the time and to give someone such credit is out of someone's majority to do. Also, alive or a dead, Shakespeare's name was being used. And if de Vere was dying, you would think he would come out with the truth, but Shakespeare's name for 30 years has been used for the plays and sonnets that were made. So I believe that superstition and pure jealousy is the reason why people say that Shakespeare was not the real Shakespeare. So I hereby stand that Shakespeare is the true author of all the things that were written and signed by his name. Thank you.
Doesn't matter, we just go up and Shakespeare.
Yeah.